I've operated the Lake Breton ferry for 6 years, 2 crossings a day, 7 days a week. Port Breton to Arnott Landing, 18 minutes each way. Average load, 43 passengers, 15 vehicles. I count for a living. Boarding count, crossing count, arrival count. 3 counts per trip, 2 trips per day. The count has never been right. Every crossing, every single crossing for 6 years, the arrival count is one higher than the boarding count. 43 board, 44 arrive. 1 extra person walks off my ferry who didn't walk on. I'm going to tell you what I did about it, and I'm going to tell you what it cost. Lake Breton sits in the northern reach of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Cold water, 312 feet at its center. The ferry connects Port Breton and Arnott Landing, 94 miles by road, 18 minutes by water. I was hired as chief operator in March of 2019. Before that, I worked cargo out of Duluth. Or that's what I remember. I live alone. Small house on the Port Breton side. I eat at Kelsey's Diner 3 mornings a week, and I'm in bed by 10 most nights. It's a quiet life. I wanted quiet after Duluth. We'll get to Duluth. 3rd week on the job, morning crossing, 43 passengers boarded, turnstile confirmed, manifest confirmed, 44 disembarked. I recounted, 44. I replaced the turnstile, new unit, factory calibrated, +1. I used manual hash marks on a clipboard, +1. I distributed numbered wristbands at boarding, 43 wristbands out. 44 people off. 1 person with no wristband, but a valid ticket in their hand. A ticket that wasn't in the sales system. With a seat number that, according to the security camera, had been empty for the entire crossing. But here's what stopped me. The ticket's serial number. Every ticket is printed with a sequential serial from a daily batch generated at 6 a.m. This ticket serial was from a batch printed 3 weeks earlier. A ticket for a seat on a crossing that hadn't happened yet, printed 21 days before the passenger existed. I started photographing every passenger at boarding and disembarkation, comparing the 2 sets. 3rd attempt, I found the extra. A man, mid-40s, gray jacket, present in the arrival photos. Not in a single boarding photo, but that wasn't the contradiction that kept me up. I pulled the security camera footage from inside the passenger cabin. 18 minutes of continuous recording. I counted every person visible in every frame. 43. The entire crossing. At no point did a 44th person appear in the cabin. Nobody entered from the vehicle deck. Nobody emerged from the head. Nobody materialized in a seat. 43 people on camera for 18 minutes. 44 walked off the ramp. The extra passenger existed at departure where he wasn't, and at arrival where he was. But during the 18 minutes between, he was nowhere. I approached him on the dock. "Can I see some identification?" "Michigan driver's license." "Valid. Real holographic overlay." I wrote down the name and number. He looked at me the way people look when you're holding them up, slightly confused. He walked off toward town. That night, I ran the license, issued 11 days earlier. The address was a house on Birch Street in Arnott Landing. Next morning, I drove there. Real house, white siding, his name on the mailbox. Truck in the driveway. Mortgage, 23 days old. Bank account, 5 weeks old. Utility connection, 6 weeks old. But the lease on the house had been signed 8 weeks ago. 3 weeks before the bank account was opened. 5 weeks before the man appeared on my ferry. Someone had signed a lease for this house before the tenant existed. I pulled the lease from county records. The signature matched the man's driver's license signature exactly. A person who didn't exist had signed a legal document 5 weeks before he existed, in handwriting that would later become his. I sat in my truck and read that lease 3 times. Over the following 2 weeks, I identified 8 more extras using the photo comparison method. Everyone followed the same pattern: valid ID, recent documentation, an address in Lake Breton, and a paper trail that started weeks before they physically appeared. But one of them didn't fit. A woman, late 50s, appeared as the +1 on a Wednesday morning. I ran her ID valid Michigan license, but this one was issued 2 years ago. Not 2 weeks, 2 years. Her address was a condo in Arnott Landing that she'd owned since 2022. Employment records going back 3 years, credit history going back 4. I almost dismissed her as a misidentification. She had too much history, too deep a paper trail. Then I checked her birth certificate, filed with the county not at birth, but in 2021. A birth certificate for a woman supposedly born in 1967, filed 54 years after the fact. No hospital record, no attending physician's signature, just a late filing with a clerk's stamp. She was the same as the others. She'd just been here longer. And the longer they stay, the deeper the cover gets. 4 years of real credit history, 3 years of real employment, layer after layer of genuine living built on top of a foundation that doesn't exist. It meant the new ones, the ones with 6 weeks of documentation, were easy to spot. The older ones were invisible. Murray has been the deckhand on the Breton for 15 years. 61 years old, quiet. The kind of man who finishes a job before you notice it needed doing. We drank coffee most mornings in the wheelhouse before the 7:15. Murray always brought 2 cups from the gas station on his way in, one for him, one for me. Never asked how I took it, just noticed the first week that I drank it black and never got it wrong after that. 15 years of working this ferry, and he still showed up 10 minutes early every morning with 2 coffees and his vest already on. On a Tuesday, 6 months into my investigation, I brought it up. Murray, the head count. He kept looking at the lake. "How far did you get?" he said. "I've identified 9, all with fabricated histories." I identified 112 between 2010 and 2012. He poured more coffee. His hands were steady, but his face carried a weight I hadn't understood until then. Names, photos, ID numbers. I checked back on them 6 months later. They were all still here. Jobs, leases, real lives. "You reported it?" 3 times. Coast Guard, company, county. Nobody follows up. Reports go in, and nothing comes out. What are they? People. They eat, they sleep, they get sick. He paused. They just started recently. I found one of Murray's old cases still living in town. A man named Garrett. Murray's file listed him as a +1 from 2011, now worked at the auto parts store. 14 years in Lake Breton. I went in and bought brake pads I didn't need. Made conversation. "You grow up around here?" "Saginaw. Moved up in 07. Went to school down there. Lincoln High, class of 98. Lincoln High School in Saginaw closed in 1989. 9 years before, Garrett claimed to have graduated. His memory wasn't a lie. It was a manufacturing defect. The details were vivid and specific, but the facts behind them didn't hold. A school that had been a parking lot since he was supposedly in 3rd grade. Garrett didn't know. He remembered it clearly, he would have passed a polygraph. 2 crossings per day, 365 days a year, 730 new arrivals per year. The route was established in 1988. 27,000 people deposited into reality over 37 years. I pulled historical records, looking for precedent. I found more than I expected. A 1943 census report from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources noted a persistent population discrepancy of approximately 1 individual per seasonal crossing period in lakeside communities. The surveyor flagged it as a counting error. His supervisor noted in the margin, discrepancy consistent with 31 and 39 counts. Recommend revised methodology. They blamed the tools. Nobody investigated the lake. I went further back. A Hudson's Bay Company trading log from 1847. A factor stationed at a post on the North Shore recorded, counted 7 men in the canoe departing the south bank. 8 men arrived. The 8th was not known to any of the 7. He spoke French and claimed to have paddled from Trois-Rivières, a journey of many weeks. He was in dry clothes. Dry clothes, after an 18-minute canoe crossing on a lake that was supposedly his only route from Quebec. The factor noted the discrepancy, offered the man shelter, and never wrote about him again. I found 3 more references in logging company ledgers from the 1870s. Each one described an extra man arriving at the North Shore who hadn't departed from the south. Each time, the extra was absorbed into the work crew. Each time, nobody followed up. The lake had been doing this for at least 200 years. The ferry was just the current delivery system. I thought that was the answer. Then I found the other entries. I was deep in the historical crossing logs, 37 years of daily records in filing cabinets. Nobody opens, looking for +1 patterns. When I found a crossing from 1993, 38 boarded, 37 arrived. Not +1, -1. No incident report, no man overboard alarm, no missing person filing. Just a -1 annotation in the log, and no follow-up. I kept searching. 1994, 2 -1 crossings. 98, 3. They were scattered, rare, but increasing. 2005, 8. 2010, 14, 15, 31, 20, 67. Last year, 119. I cross-referenced the -1 records against Murray's old file, a man who appeared as a +1 in 2009. Name, photo, ID. 14 years in Arnott Landing. Worked at the lumber yard. In 2023, his name appeared on the boarding manifest. The arrival count was -1. He never disembarked. No missing person report was filed. His apartment was cleaned out within the week. I found 11 more matches. Every -1 I could identify was a former +1, created by the ferry. Then, years later, recalled. Boarded and vanished during the crossing. But here was the contradiction I couldn't resolve. 3 of the -1 passengers never appeared on any boarding manifest. They weren't ticketed. They weren't photographed at the ramp. According to every record, they never boarded. But the count dropped by 1. Someone who was on the ferry at departure wasn't there at arrival, and there was no evidence they'd boarded in the first place. As if the lake could reach onto the boat and withdraw someone without the turnstile, the manifest, or the camera ever registering their presence. The same way the +1s appeared, between departure and arrival. In the gap. In the 18 minutes where, according to every recording device on the vessel, nothing changes. I asked around town about people who disappeared, co-workers, neighbors. Same answer every time. He seemed fine, maybe a little distracted toward the end. She kept looking at the lake. He told me the water looked warm. It was November. The water looked warm. That was the signal, the pull before the recall. I brought the -1 data to Murray, the cross-references, the acceleration. He sat in the wheelhouse. Dawn light on the water, coffee going cold. "I know," he said. "Since when?" 2012. Found 6 -1s while tracking the +1s. That's why I stopped. Why? He looked at me with the expression I'd seen for 6 years and never understood. Because I'm one of them. The wheelhouse went quiet. January of 2010, +1. Walked off at Arnott Landing with a valid license and the knowledge of how to tie a bowline and operate a deck winch. He paused. No birth certificate, no parents. I remember growing up in Traverse City. I remember my mother's kitchen. None of it happened. Murray. The water started looking warm to me last October. Like bath water, like it's waiting. He said it the way a man reads a test result. I don't know when, next month, next year, but it's coming. The investigation demanded one more step. I'd audited the passengers. I'd audited the town. I hadn't audited the crew. I pulled the personnel files for every employee of Breton Maritime Services. 7 people. Same checks I'd run on every +1. The captain, born in Marquette. Full history, clean. Ticket clerk, born in Sault Ste. Marie. Full history, clean. Maintenance tech, born in Escanaba. Clean. Murray, confirmed. No records before 2010, my own file. Just the next name on the list. Employment start date, March 14th, 2019. Driver's license, first issued, February 28th, 2019. Social Security, first activity, January 2019. I called the cargo company in Duluth. 8 years on Great Lakes freighters, Kessler in his packer's cap, the break room vending machine that took only quarters. We don't have anyone by that name in our system, active, inactive, or archived. I pulled my truck to the shoulder of Route 7 and sat there with the engine running. My hands were shaking. Not a lot, just enough that I noticed. The phone was still in my hand. The Duluth number was still on the screen. I could see the lake through the trees, flat, gray, ordinary. I sat there for 20 minutes. Then I drove to the archive room, pulled the log for March 2019, March 13th, the previous operator's handwriting. 0715 crossing, 43 boarded, 44 at arrival. Extra passenger, male, mid-40s, work boots, stated he was a ferry operator, appeared disoriented, walked off toward terminal. The next day, I showed up for my first shift, a job I remember applying for, an application the company has no record of. I was passenger 44. Murray and I didn't talk about it much after that. There wasn't much to say. We were the same thing. On a Thursday morning, I asked him directly, "How warm does it look?" He glanced at the lake. "Like bathwater. Has for about a month." "Are you afraid?" He thought about it. "It's more like knowing you have to return something you borrowed. You always knew it wasn't yours." That was the last real conversation I had with Murray. Friday morning, 7:15 crossing, 43 passengers booked. Murray was at the vehicle deck, directing cars. Same routine. I saw him tie the stern line as we pulled away from Port Breton. Same bowline he'd tied 15,000 times. Flat water, gray sky, 18 minutes. At Arnott Landing, I stood at the exit with my clicker. 44, a woman I didn't recognize. Mid-30s, paper coffee cup she hadn't been holding at boarding. No wristband, valid ticket. +1. I checked the vehicle deck, empty. Checked the head, the engine room, the wheelhouse, the stern deck. Murray was not on the boat. I radioed him, no response. Called his cell, voicemail. His truck was in the Port Breton lot. Keys in the ignition, coffee in the cup holder. Still warm. 2 coffees that morning, same as always. He'd already set mine on the wheelhouse console before departure. I hadn't noticed. It was still sitting there. Cold now. His locker was open. Safety vest folded on the bench. Work gloves placed neatly on top. The way you set something down when you know you won't pick it up again. +1, -1. Same crossing. Murray had worked this ferry for 15 years. He tied the stern line at Port Breton and was gone before we reached Arnott Landing. 18 minutes. He spent them doing his job. I filed a missing person report. The sheriff searched the lake. Divers swept the crossing lane. Nothing. Within a week, people stopped mentioning Murray. Not suddenly, gradually. The ticket clerk looked at me blankly when I said his name. His phone number disappeared from the crew contact list. Not deleted, it was never there. The system was editing him out, the way it edits out every recalled person. Slowly, completely. But I remembered. Because I'm the same thing he was, and created people remember each other. I went to Murray's locker to collect his things before someone cleaned it out and forgot whose they were. Vest, gloves, rain jacket, thermos. And underneath the thermos, a manila folder. Inside, a printout from the Breton Maritime Services personnel system, a pending employment application. Position, deckhand. Applicant, a name I didn't recognize. Application date, the Wednesday before Murray disappeared. Start date, the Monday after. Someone had applied for Murray's job 2 days before Murray was recalled. Before anyone knew, Friday's crossing would be his last. The replacement was already in the system. The recall was scheduled. The lake didn't just take people back. It prepared the transition. I sat on the crew room bench. Then I did what the investigation required. I went back to the personnel system, searched for pending applications, open positions, future start dates. 2 results. First, deckhand, Murray's replacement. Start date, Monday. Second, chief operator. My position. Applicant, a name that existed in no database. No license, no social security record, no history. A person who hadn't been created yet. Start date, November 17th, 8 months from now. I sat in the wheelhouse for a long time. The afternoon crossing was in 3 hours. 8 months. That's what the system had scheduled. 8 months, until a man walks off this ferry with a manufactured memory of working cargo ships and the knowledge of how to run the MV Breton. 8 months, until I tie the stern line at Port Breton and don't make it to Arnott Landing. I looked at the lake. It didn't look cold anymore. It hadn't since the morning Murray vanished. The afternoon crossing was at 4:30, 38 passengers booked. I ran the pre-departure, lowered the ramp, stood at the turnstile with my clipboard, 38 passengers on 38 clicks, 38 hash marks. I raised the ramp, started the engine. The lake was quiet. 18 minutes ahead of me, Arnott Landing was waiting. The arrival count would be 39. It always is. I don't know what the lake is. I don't know why it makes people or why it takes them back. I don't know if there are other lakes like this one. But I know that in 8 months, a man I've never met will walk off this ferry and take my place. He'll stand at this turnstile. He'll count passengers. He'll notice the numbers are wrong. And he'll investigate, because that's what the lake builds us to do. It gives us the curiosity, the training, the instinct to count and recount and document. Just enough time to understand. Then it brings us home. The count has never been right. It never will be. And somewhere in the system, in a file that hasn't been printed yet, in a batch that hasn't been generated, there's a ticket with my seat number on it. Return crossing. One way. Already paid for.